Randolph Scott was born George Randolph Scott on January 23, 1898 in Orange County, Virginia. He became one of Hollywood's biggest and most well-known actors, especially in cowboy movies. His career went from silent films in the 1920s all the way to the late 1960s, and he became a beloved symbol of American toughness and quiet heroism. Scott was more than just an actor. He stood for a specific idea in American culture, one based on strength, honor, and a tough sense of doing things your own way. His legacy lives on not only through his movies but in the countless nice things said about him by people who worked with him and the millions who enjoyed watching his work. Randolph Scott grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina in a wealthy family. His father, George Grant Scott, was a certified public accountant while his mother, Lucille Crane Scott, took care of the home and raised Randolph and his brothers and sisters. The family knew a lot of important people, and this gave Scott a comfortable childhood with access to good schools and opportunities. He went to private schools and later signed up at Georgia Institute of Technology, where he briefly studied engineering. However, World War I stopped his studies. During World War I, Scott joined the U.S. Army, where he served in France as part of the 2nd Trench Mortar Battalion. Although he never saw heavy fighting, his time in the military taught him discipline and maturity that would shape who he was both on and off the screen. After the war, Scott came home with a deep respect for the values of service, honor, and patriotism. These qualities would later influence many of the characters he played in his movie career, especially in the cowboy films he became famous for. After the war, Scott briefly went back to North Carolina, but he soon got restless. He felt drawn to the growing film business in Hollywood, which was quickly becoming the entertainment capital of the world. In the early 1920s, with his father's encouragement, Scott moved to California to try to become an actor. He took acting classes and started working as an extra and small part player in silent movies. His good looks, tall body, and natural athletic ability quickly got people's attention, and he found steady work in small roles. His big break came when he met director Cecil B. DeMille, one of Hollywood's most powerful filmmakers at the time. DeMille was impressed by Scott's manner and cast him in several small but important roles in early sound films. These appearances helped Scott get more recognition, and soon he was being cast in bigger supporting roles. His early work in films like The Virginian, 1929, and The Last Roundup, 1934, showed his potential as a main actor, particularly in westerns where his natural cowboy-like presence seemed perfectly suited. Randolph Scott's career really took off in the 1930s and 1940s when he became one of Hollywood's most profitable stars in western films. He quickly found his place in cowboy movies, starring in a bunch of successful westerns that made his reputation solid as the perfect cowboy hero. Films like Last of the Mohicans, 1936, Jesse James, 1939, and Western Union, 1941, helped make him one of the most popular actors of his time. His calm, steady manner combined with his rugged good looks and tall athletic build made him the ideal version of the Western hero. What made Scott different from other Western stars of that time was his ability to bring depth and complexity to what could have otherwise been simple one-dimensional characters. His characters were often morally complicated men who had to deal with difficult situations, making him a relatable and human hero. He didn't play loud or showy characters. Instead, he brought a quiet strength and calmness to his performances that connected with audiences. His characters were men who didn't talk much but took a lot of action, reflecting the traditional American values of hard work, never giving up, and honesty. One of the most important parts of Randolph Scott's career came in the 1950s when he started working with director Bud Boetticher. Together they made a series of westerns that are now thought of as some of the finest examples of cowboy movies. These films, often called the Ranone cycle after the production company formed by Scott and producer Harry Joe Brown, included classics such as 7 Men From Now, 1956, The Tall T, 1957, and Ride Lonesome, 1959. Boetticher's films were lean, character-driven stories that often explored themes of revenge, redemption, and the harsh reality of life in the Old West. Scott's performances in these films were some of the best of his career, as he played more mature, tired characters who were struggling with their own moral problems. In many ways, these films showed the peak of Scott's career as an actor, as he brought all of his experience and seriousness to these roles. The partnership between Scott and Boetticher is now thought of as one of the most successful in Western movie history, and these films have influenced countless filmmakers and actors who came after. While Randolph Scott's on-screen image was that of a rugged, lonely cowboy, his personal life was marked by stability and privacy. In 1936, He married Marion DuPont, the daughter of wealthy businessman William DuPont. Their marriage, however, was short-lived and they divorced 3 years later. In 1944, Scott married Patricia Stillman, and their marriage lasted until his death in 1987. Together they adopted 2 children, Sandra and Christopher, and lived a quiet private life in Beverly Hills away from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Scott was known for his strong Christian faith, and he stayed committed to his family and his church throughout his life. Despite being one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood, Scott liked to keep a low profile. He stayed away from the tabloid scandals and controversies that hurt many of his fellow actors, and he rarely gave interviews or showed up at public events. Those who knew him described him as a humble, soft-spoken man who was more interested in his family and hobbies such as golf than in fame or fortune. In fact, after stopping acting in 1962, Scott largely disappeared from public view, choosing to spend his remaining years in peaceful retirement. After appearing in more than 100 films, Randolph Scott retired from acting in 1962 following the release of Ride the High Country, a film that is widely thought of as one of the best westerns ever made. Directed by Sam Peckinpah, the film featured Scott alongside fellow Western legend Joel McCrea, and it was a fitting end to Scott's amazing career. Unlike many actors who have trouble with retirement, Scott welcomed it fully, choosing to live a quiet, private life in Southern California. In retirement, Scott stayed active in his community and was a passionate golfer, regularly playing in charity tournaments. He was also involved in charitable work, particularly those related to his Christian faith. He became a member of the Bel Air Country Club and enjoyed the peaceful, relaxed lifestyle he had worked so hard to achieve. Scott was known to be a private man, and after his retirement he mostly stayed out of the public eye. He spent his time enjoying his hobbies, which included golf and managing his investments, as he had been a smart businessman throughout his career. Randolph Scott, the famous actor known for his calm and rugged roles in classic Western films, left a lasting legacy in Hollywood that continues to captivate audiences even today. However, despite his on-screen image of a man who didn't say much, Scott's personal life was marked by deep emotion and self-reflection that few truly understood during his lifetime. In a stunning revelation, it was a note he left behind that would give a glimpse into the man behind the cowboy hat and the gunslinger roles, offering an unprecedented window into his heart and mind. Throughout his career, Randolph Scott was the perfect example of the classic Western hero. With a tall, lean body and piercing eyes, he became a symbol of masculinity, strength, and honor. His characters were often men of principle, facing the dangers of the frontier with an unwavering sense of justice. From films like Ride the High Country to Comanche Station, Scott's career lasted over 3 decades, making him one of the most beloved and profitable stars of the Western genre. However, despite his fame and the larger-than-life image that Hollywood built around him, Scott was famously private. Fans loved him, yet little was known about his personal life beyond the occasional press photo or public appearance. To the world, he was the strong, silent type, both on and off the screen. He rarely gave interviews, preferring to let his work speak for itself. As a result, much of Scott's true self stayed hidden, covered in the same mystery that defined his characters. For years, people wondered about Randolph Scott's personal life. Some Hollywood insiders whispered about the actor's relationships, particularly his long and close friendship with fellow actor Cary Grant. Scott and Grant lived together for years in a beachfront home in Malibu, leading to rumors that ranged from questions about their bond to more personal questions about Scott's sexuality, an issue that at the time was both taboo and highly controversial in Hollywood. Yet Scott never publicly talked about these rumors. He stayed firm in his silence, continuing to build his image as a Western hero. Behind closed doors, however, it's believed that Scott struggled with his identity, society's expectations, and the pressures of keeping up a certain image in an era when the film industry often demanded conformity to traditional gender roles and public images. Scott may have felt trapped by the very fame that had brought him so much success. It wasn't until after Scott's death in 1987, at the age of 89, that the world would get some insight into the internal conflict that had long troubled the actor. Among his personal belongings was a handwritten note, which he left for his family and close friends. The note, short but deep, revealed a side of Randolph Scott that no one had ever known. In it, Scott confessed to the deep loneliness he had felt throughout his life, despite the fame and love he had received from fans around the world. The note also touched on the complications of his relationships, hinting at regrets and missed chances for true emotional connection. He expressed sorrow for the walls he had built around himself, both personally and professionally, as a way of protecting his private life from public attention. In doing so, Scott admitted the price of fame and the toll it had taken on his ability to live honestly. Perhaps most touchingly, Scott's note suggested a longing for a world in which he could have been more open about who he truly was without fear of judgment or career consequences. While he didn't directly address the rumors surrounding his relationship with Cary Grant or his sexuality, the tone of the letter suggested that Scott had carried the burden of secrecy for much of his life. His confession was not one of scandal but of deep personal sadness, a realization that the image he had created for public consumption had in many ways stopped him from fully accepting his true self. Several years ago, I saw a photograph of Cary Grant and Randolph Scott standing extremely close. Both men were wearing frilly monogrammed aprons, staring into each other's eyes, leaving little doubt about their relationship. As Randolph Scott was a childhood hero of mine, it was quite a shock to me. There's been slightly less wondering about Scott's sexuality than there has been about Grant's through the years, most probably because A, he wasn't as big a star, and B, as a person he was more careful. But the known facts about Cary Grant leave little doubt that he was gay, which in turn makes it even more obvious that his relationship with Scott was a good deal more than just friendship. Before becoming famous in Hollywood, Grant lived and worked in New York, having moved from the UK. During that time, he had an ongoing relationship with future Hollywood designer Ori Kelly, which Kelly wrote about in his memoirs only recently made public. As a struggling actor, Grant was also known to get by on the kindness of strangers, as Tennessee Williams would have said, not quite a rent boy but definitely a bit of a gigolo, using his charms on wealthy older men. In his Hollywood years, Grant was a client of Hollywood pimp Scotty Bowers, who arranged many meetings with young men. Grant's early marriages were quite obviously arranged as a cover for his sexuality, and there wasn't even much effort at the time to pretend otherwise. Like Scott, Grant eventually settled into longer heterosexual relationships, but then so did most gay men of the time. It was what you had to do to get by, especially in the public eye, and for Hollywood stars, the arrival of tabloid tell-all journalism in the 50s made being carefree about one's private life much more dangerous than it was in the 30s and 40s. In short, when you consider all the evidence, there's really no doubt at all that Grant and Scott were lovers. I'm very happy for the life they had together. It seems to have been filled with love and joy and happiness. I'm only sorry neither of them lived in a time they could come out in without consequences. The discovery of Randolph Scott's note has forever changed the way the world sees the actor. For decades, fans and historians had painted a picture of Scott as a simple, strong, and straightforward man who perfectly represented the values of the Old West. But the note revealed a more complex individual, one whose inner life was filled with the same doubts, fears, and emotional struggles that many people face. For many, the note has also sparked a fresh look at the pressures faced by Hollywood actors of Scott's era. The golden age of Hollywood was famous for its strict enforcement of gender norms, its intolerance of anything that went against the mainstream, and the intense scrutiny that stars faced in their personal lives. For Scott, this meant a life of emotional restraint, where living openly and honestly was not an option. The note serves as a reminder of the human cost of these social expectations and the sacrifices that many actors of the time were forced to make. In addition to changing the public's view of Scott, the note has also brought a sense of closure to those who were closest to him. His family, who had long respected his privacy, gained a new understanding of the emotional burden he had carried. Close friends, too, were finally given a glimpse into the thoughts and feelings he had often kept hidden from them. In many ways, the note served as a final act of honesty and vulnerability, a way for Scott to express in death the feelings he had struggled to communicate in life.